Thomas Workman and A.J. Kavanagh are intuitive channels who have a remarkable ability to speak for a spiritual collective they call the Guides. They are unique in that they channel the Guides together, sharing one mind as they deliver messages. The primary interest of the Guides is helping us all live consistently in the state of joy, accomplished through a set of simple practices they call the infinite pathway. The infinite pathway, journey to self-realization.
Hi, I'm A.J. Kavanagh.
And I'm Thomas Workman. Welcome to the Infinite Pathway, Journey to Self-Realization.
In this series, Thomas and I talk through some of the foundational principles that the guides we channel have shared with us.
Because by applying these truths, we can expand our consciousness and live lives of consistent joy.
Well, we've discussed some pretty important aspects over these first few weeks. Our eternal nature and learning about the importance of energy and the energy that surrounds us.
How our thoughts can raise our vibration and help us live a life of more consistent joy.
And we've also talked about our freedom to make choices again and again and again that serve us better and lead us to the things we desire and the life we wish to live.
And if you've been watching, you may have realized that all the principles build upon one another, giving us a greater view of how Source created us and is constantly expanding us through our soul's eternal journey, lifetime after lifetime.
And these next two episodes are no exception, as the guides help us grow in our understanding of the experiences we tend to see as negative or unwanted, but are actually one of the ways that the universe helps us grow to expand our consciousness.
That's right. In this episode, we're going to introduce the concept of contrast and let the guides show us the essential role it plays in our lives.
Now, we live in a world of contrast, and thank goodness for that. I mean, can you imagine having the exact same experience every day, just like poor actor Bill Murray did in the movie Groundhog Day? I mean, even the things we love would eventually become less meaningful or appreciated. And what kind of life would that be?
Yeah, you raised an important point. We do welcome and even celebrate some forms of contrast, like the changing of the seasons. However, when you think about it, much of the contrast we experience is just variety, as both sides of the spectrum have some positive aspects for us to enjoy in moderation.
Right. Even though some people prefer a warm climate instead of a cold one, many of us love the variety of living in a place that offers us some of both.
Yep, I do too. But other contrasts in our lives introduce experiences that are not what we expect or hope for. This kind of contrast can make us feel downright miserable, like having a significant issue with our health or an unexpected downward turn of our financial affairs.
Yes, and at one time or another, we've all faced situations of contrast that we'd rather do without. Now, as you can imagine, the guides have shared some fascinating insight on the topic of contrast, so much so that we can't fit it into just one episode. So we'll continue our conversation in the next episode, where we'll be talking about thinking beyond our circumstances.
That all sounds great, but enough of the intro, let's dig in.
All right.
As usual, there are a few basic principles we need to understand first about how the universe views contrast. Let's hear the guides as they explain.
We wish to speak of this in great detail, for it is so very important for you to understand. So let us begin by discussing contrast. For contrast is a part of the universe, and we remind you that duality was not an error, it was not a mistake. There are no mistakes in creation, and it has a purpose for you appreciate warmth through the cold, and you understand satiation through hunger or thirst. You have at all times contrast that is enabled to heighten an understanding for you of both components. So we would say to you, dear one, that yes, there is darkness, and yes, darkness exists as the absence of light. See it as a duality. See the spectrum moves from the highest of light to the darkest of dark. And yet understand that this enables you always, as all contrast does, to make a choice. To decide which you wish to live in, which serves you best.
Right out of the gate, the guides introduce the concept of duality and explain that it has a very important purpose.
Let's talk about this a bit, because this is one of the more important aspects of our human existence. The guides teach that we can view every aspect of our reality as a spectrum with two distinct and opposite endpoints, or polarities. In our current third-dimensional reality, we tend toward focusing on those endpoints like good or bad, rather than all the possibilities in between. Yet, even as we expand our consciousness and see the full spectrum available to us, we'll still always have those two polarities to help us make our choices. You know, it's funny, the concept of duality often gets a bad rap in consciousness circles.
Well, that's very true, and I think it's because, duality tends to limit us to the either or situation, even though there's much more to the two opposing sides to any reality. But the guides are making an important point about how viewing every aspect of our lives on a spectrum with two opposite ends is how we actually make sense of our reality. So there's good and there's bad, right and wrong, hungry and satiated.
Warm, cold, asleep, awake, satisfied, unsatisfied, happy, sad.
Yeah, I get it. The list goes on and on and on.
All of these polarities we just mentioned are essential elements of the universe, and they help us in a number of ways. So if you're one of the many who are contrast averse, this episode is for you.
Contrast averse, is that even a real word?
Probably not. But there really is a psychological condition called contrast avoidance, which explains why some people don't do well when they experience the opposite of what they want or expect.
Always the academic, but I love it. Anyway, back to more of what the guides have to say about contrast and how this serves us. They explain it best with this quote. It is contrast that enables you to see more clearly. It is hard for you to appreciate the morning without the night. Yes, it is hard for you to appreciate warmth without the cold. And so it is the nature of the universe to utilize this contrast.
Well, it certainly is easier to understand something better by seeing its opposite.
Exactly. For example, we have a greater understanding of peace when we have conflict, and vice versa. Or we have a better appreciation of sweet once we've experienced sour. Although we may not always like the contrast, the guides have an interesting perspective on why contrast exists. And they say, contrast is a tool of yours. It is your servant. It is there for you to assist you.
Well, let's dig into some of the ways that contrast serves us. In addition to enhancing our understanding, the guides say that the experience of contrast in our lives is how the universe helps us to discover what we want and what we don't want, so that we can make choices that better serve us. Here's an example of one of their statements.
It is important for you to ask on a regular basis, what is it that I want? And to recognize that the contrasts that exist within your life are designed to help refine for you. For how shall you know the beauty of a sunny day without the rainy day, without the cloudy day? And this contrast is serving you.
Now, that clarity about what we want by experiencing what we don't want occurs on a variety of levels.
It sure does. There's contrast in our personal lives, which helps us better understand our personal preferences and desires. For example, through contrast, we may realize that we prefer doing lots of little projects, or we may realize that we prefer to focus on one major single project that may even last a lifetime. Here's the guides describing this to us in a different way. They say, and so the sum of your life's experiences, the contrasts that you have lived, are opportunities for you to clarify what you want, often from what it is that you do not want. And these two things work hand in hand for you to refine what your desires may be and to set them clearly within you.
You know, it's just like that song by Pharrell Williams. You know, the one that was featured in the 2013 classic film Despicable Me 2. Here's what they sing. This rainy day is temporary. The contrast is why we got 'em. The sun shining through is just a cloud away. So what? You blown a fuse. Well, that happens to us all. When I come with great news, the day could change.
Well, that works, but really, Despicable Me Too?
Why not? All right, moving on. On the other hand, some contrast helps us think about what we want in our collective environment so that we can decide together the kind of world we want to live in.
For example?
Well, there are many, from civil rights to political philosophies. I think a lot of us experience the news of war and violence and crime as a way of realizing together that the world we'd prefer to live in is one where people are kind and respectful to one another.
Yes. You know, in this way, contrast can, if we're conscious of it, help us recognize what we as a collective humanity actually value. Contrast really is the basis of civilization and every culture and society that's ever been.
That's true. And it's one of the reasons why so many humans are becoming increasingly conscious of the contrast that exists in our civilization right now, which is all calling us towards oneness. Here's how the guides explain it.
So critical for you as humanity to rediscover, for it is a part of why you are feeling in so much chaos at the time. Notice how when chaos emerges, it always emerges as a gift, for this is how the universe always operates. We remind you, you know this already. We remind you that the universe only works for your greatest and highest good, the greatest and highest good of all of its creation, including us, including all other beings. And so when chaos emerges, chaos is brought down as a tool that can allow you to remember and allow you to seek a different choice, for the choice is not working now. The choice that you have made is perhaps not serving you well, and by you, we mean all of you, all of humanity.
Here's where the guides introduce the idea that some contrasts can feel like chaos. I think many of us, just by looking at current world events, would agree that the contrast out there certainly seems like chaos. In all forms of contrast, the lesson it's trying to teach us is to move past our discomfort to see where the contrast leads us to improvement. They talk about this very point in another channeling. Many occasions of your lives will provide a contrast to show you what it is that you do not want. And these things can manifest as well. That can be caught quickly in order for you to say quickly, this is not what I wanted. Then to return to what it is that you do want, what it is that you are interested in, what it is that you believe will cause you great benefit or serve you well.
So, the contrast we're seeing right now, freedom, control, judgment, acceptance, compassion, disdain, hatred, love, are all helping us collectively and individually decide what is most important to us and to our survival as a species.
Decade after decade, century after century, history is full of examples of how our collective choices lead to societies that flourished and those that have since declined. Here's how the guides talk about our current world events as a matter of contrast.
The contrast on your planet now is quite extreme and will continue to be so as portions of your planet, of your humanity, struggle with their desire for power, with their desire of greed, with their wishing to own all and to control all. And yet you are feeling, as are your fellow humans, that this is not of your best service. This does not necessarily serve you as a whole well. And so the opportunities for you to wish for something more, we encourage you now to take the events of your world now and to make your wishes known to the universe. I wish for a kinder planet. I wish for a more loving planet. I wish for a planet that is able to share its unending resources. I wish for a planet that is able to feel its natural inborn compassion. These, as well as many others, are there for you, especially during the energies of this time. And so we encourage you to allow yourself to see through the conflict, to not allow it to daunt you, to not allow it to frighten you, for that is not its purpose. Or we remind you that the purpose of all of this contrast, whether it be the traffic that you find yourself in when you are driving, or whether it be the conflict that is occurring across the planet, to instead realize this is your opportunity to wish for something that serves you and your fellow humans better and in greater, expanded, improved ways.
Wow. So, the more conscious we are to recognize and learn from contrast, the more we evolve into a civilization that thrives.
I like that idea of us learning from contrast as a way of improving us, and the guides have more to share along those lines.
What we speak of with you tonight is integration. It is an understanding of your ability to take the additional illumination that is coming to you as it comes to you, as you experience the contrast, and not to allow the contrast to create despair, but instead to recognize what is underneath of the contrast, what it is that you are seeing, so that you may set your intentions and integrate these into the whole of what it is you are wanting and what it is that you are needing.
The guides mention one of our, and certainly my, greatest challenge when we experience contrast. Instead of making active decisions from the insights that contrast provides, we respond emotionally to the contrast, feeling anger, despair, or any number of negative emotions that are based on lower vibrational thinking.
Yeah, the guides understand us humans perfectly, including our tendency to focus on the problem instead of the solution. The guides often remind us that by focusing on what we don't want just attracts more of the same. Like when we worry about a bill to pay only when we get more bills that need to be paid in the mailbox.
Right. Because the universe never says no, so whatever we focus on becomes what we manifest. A great example of this is the contrast between lack and abundance. The guides have helped many people who tell stories about what they don't have and ask why abundance keeps eluding them. It's difficult for many of us to see this connection between where we focus our thoughts and the outcomes we experience.
Yep, it's Consciousness 101. We get what we think about. And I need to be reminded of that pretty often.
I do too. It's so easy for me to focus on the negative end of the spectrum and decide that because of the contrast I'm viewing in my life right now, I'm destined to be miserable for the rest of my life.
Oh my goodness. Yep. All we need to do is to use a negative to find the positive end of the spectrum and focus there. Here's a great example of how the guides discuss this. We wish to talk about the idea of assigned meaning. Often when you look at various aspects of your life or your conditions, specifically in the 3D physical realm, you see the extremes of contrast. You see the light and the dark. You see this duality, as it were. And based perhaps on your experiences, you may assign them as bad or negative or or something to look out for, or something to be removed. Whereas in the larger universe, we look at this as just as an aspect of the universe. There will always be contrast. There will always be the light and the dark, for we do not assign a meaning to it in that same way. We wish to perfectly illustrate this with the symbol of the yin and the yang. You see, it is in a perfect whole with no beginning and no end. It is complete with the aspects of light and dark, each containing aspects of light and dark within it. And the nature of the symbol represents fluidity, motion, but also perfect balance. This is from the vantage upon which you are to view your circumstances and duality in this sense.
Yeah, I want that perspective. Imagine how viewing the contrast in our lives from a neutral perspective, without assigning good or bad or right or wrong, might enable us to focus on the ways that contrast is working for us and not against us.
Yes, that's exactly what Source wants for us to understand. And this is exactly what Source desires for us as well. We'll dive into this more in our next episode when we talk about how we deal with the many and varied circumstances that are in our lives. But for now, the guides want us to consider the idea of releasing the stories we tell about how contrast is ruining our lives, and instead to surrender to what contrast is there to show us.
Those stories declare what is wrong with the world and that we need to do something about it, pass a law, protest in the streets, write another blog decrying injustice. But the guides suggest a very different approach, where we trust the universe and its process of evolution, where we allow all things to unfold towards our greatest and highest good. Here's what they said recently.
We return again to the nature of surrender, yet it seems quite a dichotomy when there is such duality about the idea that you are doers and you wish to do, and yet the idea that you are protected and this is part of the divine path. Simply allow things to unfold in the natural order in which they should, for after any storm there is a clearing and a brighter horizon and new and often better endeavors to be held ahead for you.
And yet, dear ones, there is far more than simply survival of a storm we wish to explain to you. There is instead a beautiful gift of a perspective that you may maintain in good and bad times. It is not simply a matter of preparing you for disaster. No, this is not the point of this transmission. The point of this transmission is far more around your ability to replace what has become preoccupying for you, the funding and income and expenses, the pains and aches, the challenges, all these things, good or bad, in plenty or in lack. Yeah, simply things that are not meant to preoccupy, but simply to work through. We also suggest to you that the emotions that you feel during times when you reflect upon your planet or the inhumanity, your lack of consciousness of those that are around you, this too is merely something to allow to pass through you rather than to latch on to, for latching on creates great despair.
Let's listen to the guides pull all this together for us.
This period of time is a beautiful opportunity for you to expand, and expansion requires contrast. We have said to you before many times that it is contrast that does its work in your growth and evolution. It is the contrary. It is not the comfortable, and it is not the known that is what enables you to grow. It is instead those things that are distinct and different and new, and because of that uncomfortable. Yet we would remind you in the midst of chaos, for we know and can see the amount of chaos that surrounds you, perhaps individually, but certainly collectively. The chaos that surrounds you is doing its work. And so we would recommend to you to, instead of being focused on the chaos and seeing what is being told to you around the world, for you have this unique ability of knowing everything that is happening across your world almost instantly. And we would say to you that instead of allowing yourself to focus all of your attention in that chaos, to instead allow yourself instead to see the product of the chaos. For as we are saying to you, all chaos is leading you toward evolutionary growth. It is leading you to a higher position. It is leading you to greater outcomes.
Did you catch that? The chaos around us is leading us to greater outcomes rather than our destruction. What a great way to view all of the contrast around us right now, by realizing that what we may feel like as being chaos is actually evolution at work. Contrast and even chaos exposes those aspects of our lives and our civilization that we don't want, for the very purpose of focusing us on improvement.
That's pretty amazing and a great relief.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, as we've said at the top of the episode, there's much more for us to explore and understand around the idea of contrast and the experiences in our lives that can lead us to despair. And we'll take up those in our next episode.
You know, I know we are both so grateful for the guides providing these messages. I mean, aren't you glad to know that we don't have to let the contrast in our lives defeat us?
Oh, yeah, more than words can say. So, how can we put what we've learned from the guides into something like a daily practice for our viewers?
I'm glad you asked.
Well, it was in the script, Tom.
Oh, that's right. Okay, well, our first practice we'll call What Did I Learn? You can devote a meditation time to this or use a journal if you prefer.
What we're suggesting here is to identify something you have learned about yourself from an experience of contrast. Now, I remember when I was a teenager and starting out going to parties and drinking and sometimes getting drunk. And I learned that while others actually enjoyed drinking, I didn't like the taste of alcohol or the effects that it had on me. And I also learned from that experience that the environment was not for me either. I far more enjoyed the experience of being fully present and having meaningful conversations with people.
Perfect. So the contrast helped you know who you are better. All of us have learned about ourselves often by living the opposite of who we are. And that's okay, because as the guides say, that's how we learn about ourselves.
Yes, and I had to stop apologizing too, because a lot of people would criticize me for not drinking. And, I'm fine with that. This contrast enabled me to strengthen and like the I am that I am.
Yeah, a lot of times we read statements of judgment in the choices that we make.
Very true.
So what we want you to do in this practice is to create a list of those aspects of yourself that are now clear to you, and think about how the experience of contrast brought you to this understanding.
I find this a really good self-affirming practice. But just remember, you never have to apologize for who you are.
Our second practice is to pivot our negative reactions to contrast by realizing quickly what we want instead. Thinking about what we want keeps the contrast from lowering the vibration of our thoughts. You can do this at any moment when contrast is bringing up negative thoughts and emotions for you.
Right. So the more you reflect on what you're learning from contrast, the better you can take on this practice, which is asking, what am I to learn in the moments where I experience contrast?
I use this practice often. Whenever I experience a contrast that starts to upset me, I try to quickly say to myself, well, now I know what I don't want. So what would I prefer instead?
We've mentioned the concept of pivoting our thoughts before, and this is one of the best instances for this practice. It's taking full advantage of duality to move you closer to what you want.
One last practice. The guides are teaching us here that simply identifying what we want is only the start. Once we know what we want, we can set our intentions toward it, trust the universe in providing it, and manifest that reality.
So we recommend another list, the world I want to live in. Based on the contrast you've experienced, what reality would you rather prefer? Write these as direct statements, just like the guide suggested. I want to live in a community where humans treat one another with respect, or I want to experience greater abundance. It doesn't really matter what you want. It only matters that you articulate it to the universe clearly and set out that intention.
Perfect. Well, we hope today's episode has helped you shine through the contrast in your life. Just know, all things are working for your greatest and highest good always. It is the nature and intent of the universe. And we'll say that again, episode after episode. We'll leave you with one more inspirational quote from the guides and look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks for joining us.
We see many humans now who have allowed themselves to travel along the stream of great despair and great worry. And this is not what we wish for you, for it is not necessary. It is not critical for you. Instead, your refocusing, your change of perspective allows all these things to flow and occur as they must, for they will all pass through. They will all move along. You know with us that nothing stands still, that nothing is solid. Even you, even your own form is not solid, is not set, but is in constant transformation. We wish you great joy. We wish you a great understanding of all that is possible for you, and we cheer on your expansion for all it is doing for the remainder of humanity who shall see your light and be able to understand what is available for them. We share our love with you and leave you with our energies from Source itself so that you may realize the depth of love that is available to you. And with this, we are complete.
Coming up in the next episode of The Infinite Pathway. For the latest messages from Thomas, AJ, and the guides, please join them on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, or follow them on Instagram at Speaking From Source. You can also book your personal session with the guides on their website, speakingfromsource.com.